I used to believe that when love is true, it never changes. That if two people walk through enough seasons together, their hearts would move in rhythm like tides drawn by the same moon. That evening, the light in our dining room was soft, the kind of gold that makes every surface glow. My husband Jonathan had come home early, something rare. He decorated the table with roses and candles, a quiet celebration for my promotion at the Ward Foundation. "To my brilliant wife," he said, raising his glass. His smile was calm, proud, and I smiled back, letting warmth fill the spaces that work had emptied. He had always been like that, steady, thoughtful, the kind of man who made a woman feel safe just by standing near. I remember thinking how lucky I was, how complete life felt. But as I leaned closer to the table, a faint scent rose from the food, something rich, yet oddly metallic. It wasn't unpleasant, just different. My hand paused in midair. For a second, I couldn't tell if the unease came from the dish or from somewhere inside me. Jonathan noticed. "You're pale. Long day?" he asked, his tone gentle but slightly rehearsed, as if reading from a script. I laughed softly, brushing it off, yet a strange silence lingered between us, thin, invisible, stretching across the candlelight. Outside, the city murmured like a faraway ocean. Inside, I felt a quiet tremor, the kind that precedes a storm you can't yet see. I told myself not to overthink it, that love, like a well-built house, can withstand small cracks. But sometimes, the smallest crack is where the light or the truth slips in. I didn't know then that the scent in the air, the way his eyes darted from mine for half a second, were not coincidences. That gentle evening, the laughter, the candlelight, the taste of celebration, was the beginning of everything that would soon fall apart. Every story here is a whisper of pain turned into power. If it touched something in you, subscribe, and walk this road of awakening with me. Jonathan left the next morning, his briefcase gleaming in the early light. He said he was heading to Windermere Port, an urgent business trip, a few days at most. His tone was steady, but his eyes didn't quite meet mine. I told myself it was exhaustion. I told myself we all look away sometimes. After he drove off, silence returned to the house like a tide rolling in. I walked from room to room, straightening flowers, folding napkins left from the celebration. Everything was perfect, and yet it all felt staged, like a play that had ended but no one had told the actors to stop performing. That afternoon, I remembered something, the seaside villa my parents had given us as a wedding gift. We hadn't visited in over a year. The thought of it, its pale walls, the windows that opened to the sea, brought me a sudden ache of nostalgia. Maybe I'd go there for a day or two, clean it up, and surprise Jonathan when he returned. I imagined his face, half shocked, half touched, the way he used to look at me when we were newly married. The drive to Windermere took 3 hours. The city slowly gave way to fields and distant hills, and finally, to the endless blue of the ocean. The wind smelled of salt and rain, and I felt something inside me unclench. When I reached the villa, the afternoon light was slipping through thin clouds, the air cool and damp. From the outside, everything looked untouched. The same white facade, the same stone steps leading to the front door. But when I stepped closer, I noticed faint scuff marks near the threshold. Someone had been here. I hesitated, key in hand. Perhaps Jonathan had come recently? Maybe he'd used it for a client meeting or a retreat. That seemed possible, reasonable. I told myself that again and again as I turned the key and pushed the door open. A soft melody drifted out, a lullaby, almost too gentle to be real. It was the kind of tune mothers hum when they think no one is listening. I froze. The sound came from the hallway, followed by a faint giggle, then silence. I stepped inside. The air was warm, lived in. There were 2 pairs of slippers by the door, one adult-sized, one small, pink, with a tiny bow. My heart began to beat faster. Maybe the caretaker's family? I whispered under my breath. But I knew we had no caretaker, we never did. From the corner of my eye, I saw a framed photograph on the table. I moved closer. It showed a little boy with round cheeks, about a year old, sitting on a blanket by the beach. His smile was so wide, so familiar, it made my stomach tighten. The curve of his nose, the shape of his chin. A soft thud came from the bedroom. I turned. A young woman appeared in the doorway, startled. She wore simple pajamas, her hair tied up in a loose knot. She couldn't have been more than 25. For a moment we stared at each other, both too shocked to speak. Then she managed a polite, confused smile. "Oh, hello. Are you looking for someone?" Her voice was kind, even hesitant, but I couldn't form an answer. My mind raced, searching for explanations that wouldn't hurt. I think I came to the wrong house," I finally murmured. "Is this villa number 17? She tilted her head. "This is 15, actually. Are you sure you're not mistaken?" "Yes, I must be." I forced a laugh that sounded hollow even to me. "I'm sorry to bother you." She nodded gently, and I turned toward the door, wanting nothing more than to breathe again. But before I could step out, a child's cry pierced the silence. The woman rushed to the crib in the corner. There, my little Leo," she whispered. "Daddy Jonathan will be home soon." His name split through me like lightning. I stood frozen in the doorway. My body was present, but everything else, my voice, my thoughts had scattered like dust. Daddy Jonathan. No, it couldn't be. It must be coincidence. There are many Jonathans in the world. There must be. But the photograph on the table. The boy's nose. His smile, how could I deny what my eyes were screaming? The woman hummed softly again. Her back turned to me, rocking the baby with tenderness. A small gold pendant hung around her neck, Jonathan's initials engraved on it. Something inside me caved in quietly, without a sound. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, the latch clicking like the end of a sentence. The corridor smelled of salt and lilac detergent. For a long moment I stood still, my hand against the cold wall, listening to my own heartbeat. The world hadn't ended. Not in a dramatic way. It had simply cracked. In the reflection of the elevator mirror, my face looked calm, too calm. Only my eyes betrayed me, glassy and distant, like someone standing at the edge of a long winter sea. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I only thought of one thing: how quietly a life can begin to die, even while it still looks perfect from the outside. That day, by the sea, the wind was gentle, the sky was blue, and everything that once felt safe began to drift away. I didn't drive home that evening. I couldn't. Instead, I found myself in a small cafe, overlooking the harbor, a quiet place with chipped wooden tables and the faint hum of waves outside. The kind of place where no one asks questions. I sat by the window, ordered a black coffee, and watched the sea darken as the sun dissolved behind it. The first sip was bitter enough to hurt. But it was a clean kind of pain, honest. Unlike the sweetness I had lived in, that sweetness had turned rotten without me noticing. Outside, fishing boats rocked lazily, their lanterns trembling on the water. Everything looked calm, ordinary. Only I knew that my world had been ripped open a few hours earlier. My husband had a child. A home by the sea. A life built from my ignorance. For a long time, I just stared into my cup, watching the surface ripple every time the wind brushed through the half-open door. Each wave of coffee caught a slice of light, like fragments of my life still pretending to shine. I thought of Jonathan's business trips, the ones that always seemed to come suddenly, the phone calls he took outside, the perfume that lingered on his shirts, faint but unfamiliar. How had I been so blind? Perhaps I hadn't been blind at all, just unwilling to see. Love often disguises itself as blindness. He used to tell me, "You worry too much, Seraphine." I used to smile and say, "Because I love you too much." Now I realized they were the same thing. I felt my chest tighten. But instead of breaking, something within me began to harden. The ache stopped spreading. It crystallized into silence. I took another sip of coffee. It was cold now. The bitterness stayed longer this time, clinging to my tongue like a truth I could no longer spit out. For a moment, I wanted to run back to that house, to scream at the woman holding his child, to tear apart every lie he had ever told me. But what would that change? Rage is loud, but it solves nothing. No, I told myself. I will not scream. I will not beg. I will think. The words echoed inside me, slow, deliberate, steadying. I looked around the cafe. 2 sailors were laughing at the counter. An old couple shared a slice of pie. The waitress hummed softly as she wiped the tables. The world kept turning, completely unaware that mine had stopped. And yet, beneath the stillness, I felt a strange calm. A dangerous kind of calm, the kind that comes when pain finds a direction. I took out my notebook. the same one I used to jot down project notes for the foundation. My hand trembled at first, then steadied. On the blank page, I began to draw lines, dates, connections, small clues that suddenly made sense. The business trip. Last spring, 3 days that never appeared in his calendar. The expensive watch, he said, was a client's gift. The growing withdrawals from our joint account labeled miscellaneous expenses. One by one, the pieces formed a map of betrayal. I realized something terrifying and empowering at once. Jonathan had built his entire deceit inside the comfort of my trust, and that trust had made me predictable. I had been an open book, and he had rewritten me. Now, it was my turn to write. I remembered the photo I'd seen the boy's face, the same smile Jonathan once gave me when he promised we'd build a future together. The irony burned like a slow fire in my chest. I closed my notebook and pressed my palms around the warm cup. If he could plan an entire life behind my back, I thought, then I can plan one in front of him without him ever knowing. My reflection in the window stared back, pale, distant, yet strangely composed. The sea behind it shimmered like a mirror, endless and unreadable. For the first time, I didn't see a broken woman. I saw someone waiting to rise. I whispered to the glass, "You wanted a fool, Jonathan, but you married a ward." The waves hit the rocks outside, slow and rhythmic, as if answering me. I imagined them washing away every trace of weakness from my skin. The Seraphine, who believed in fairy tales, was gone. The woman who remained was quiet, deliberate, and patient. When I left the cafe, the night had thickened. The air smelled of salt and smoke. I walked toward my car without looking back. There was no need for confrontation. Not yet. The stage had been set, but the play was still mine to direct. In the distance, a lighthouse pulsed steadily through the fog. One flash of light, then another, guiding ships through darkness. I drove past it, my hands steady on the wheel, the bitter taste of coffee still on my tongue. It was no longer just bitterness. It was clarity. That night, I didn't cry. I simply began to think carefully, methodically, the way a woman does when she has nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. For a few days after that night, I lived as if underwater. Every sound was distant, every movement slow. I went through my routines like a shadow passing through a house that no longer belonged to her. But when the haze finally cleared, I knew what I had to do. Her name was Lydia Moore. She lived in the seaside villa, my villa, with her 1-year-old son Leo. It didn't take long to find her. Jonathan had used company funds for the house's maintenance, and the paperwork bore her signature. Everything about her life was recorded in the margins of my own. I looked at her photos online, filtered images of sunlit breakfasts, small feet on white sheets, captions that said things like, "Our little family." Her face was pretty in a fragile way, the kind that survives on attention and flattery. I stared at those images until the initial wave of anger softened into something colder, pity perhaps, or calculation. I decided to meet her, but not as myself. Seraphine Ward was a name Lydia might have heard in Jonathan's lies, perhaps twisted into the image of a jealous, bitter wife. I couldn't risk recognition. So I became Miss Rowan, a young consultant recently moved to Windermere. The woman Seraphine used to be elegant, distant, polished, had to disappear. In her place, I created someone warm, approachable, trustworthy. The kind of woman another woman could confide in without fear. It rained the day I went to find her. Not a gentle drizzle, but a storm that blurred the world into silver lines. I parked near the supermarket where she often shopped. Her schedule was easy to predict from her posts, and waited. An hour later she appeared, pushing a stroller and juggling grocery bags under the downpour. The wind caught her umbrella and turned it inside out. She looked small, helpless. That was my cue. I rolled down the window. "Hey, need a ride? You'll catch a cold out here." She hesitated, clutching the stroller, eyes wary but desperate. "I'm harmless," I said with a small smile. "Come on, the baby's getting soaked." She looked at me for a moment longer, then nodded. "Thank you." I helped her load the bags into the trunk, then covered the stroller. Her hands trembled from the cold. "I don't know how to thank you," she said as she buckled Leo in. "It's nothing," I replied gently. "It's the kind of day no one should be alone." As I drove, the rain beat steadily against the windshield, a sound like distant applause. We talked casual things at first. She told me she'd moved to Windermere a year ago, that her husband worked often, always traveling for business. I listened, nodding, offering sympathetic smiles. I didn't need to steer the conversation. Her loneliness did it for me. When she mentioned her husband, her eyes softened. He's amazing, really. Jonathan built his company from nothing. ISA Projects? Maybe you've heard of it? I gripped the steering wheel tighter. It sounds familiar, I said lightly. He told me the name came from someone important in his past, she continued. An old friend who inspired him. Oh. I could feel my nails digging into the leather. ISA, a name my father had chosen for me, for the company he gifted us. And now, in Lydia's mouth, it had become some romantic story Jonathan used to paint himself as a self-made man. I smiled thinly. He must be quite brilliant. Oh, he is, she said, glowing. And generous. He works so hard for us. Leo and I are his everything. I looked at the child in the mirror, small, drowsy, innocent. His cheeks flushed pink from the rain. For a second, I almost felt sorry. Then Lydia's next words cut through that weakness like glass. He says once he resolves a few issues with his wife, he'll make things official. I kept my tone soft. His wife? She nodded, oblivious. They've been apart for years, but she won't let go. Poor man, he deserves better. My throat burned, but my face remained calm. I glanced at the voice recorder discreetly hidden in the car console. The small red light blinked steadily, capturing every word. I adjusted my tone, casual. Leo looks just like him. She laughed, proud. Of course he does. Everyone says he's Jonathan's copy. And there it was, the confirmation. Simple. Unthinking. True. The bullet sliding into the chamber. When we reached her villa, I helped her carry the bags inside. The house looked different in daylight. Cozy, warm, full of the life that had been stolen from me. On the wall hung another photograph of Jonathan, holding the baby, smiling like a man reborn. I didn't let my expression change. Thank you again, Miss Rowan, she said. I don't meet many kind people these days. I smiled faintly. We all need someone to talk to sometimes. Before leaving, I handed her my number, another new card, another new lie. She saved it in her phone without hesitation. As I walked back to my car, the rain had stopped, but the street still shimmered with reflections. I could see my face in a puddle, distorted, rippling. Not the woman I used to be. Not yet the one I was becoming. Inside the car, I replayed the recording. Lydia's voice filled the silence, light and careless. Of course, Leo is Jonathan's son. Hearing it again, I didn't flinch. I simply sat there, letting the words settle like cold ash in my chest. It wasn't pain anymore. It was proof. I saved the file, labeled it with the date and time, then slipped my phone into my bag. One piece of evidence. One step closer. Outside, the clouds parted, and a thin ray of light touched the wet road, soft, almost merciful. But mercy was no longer part of me. That recording, that single careless sentence, was the first bullet in the gun of my revenge. Lydia was easy to read. Like most people who mistake comfort for love, her desires had a rhythm predictable, swelling with each small taste of luxury. I only had to feed it gently. Over the weeks, we met often. She believed I was misplaced. Rowan, her new friend, a kind woman who listened, admired, and never judged. I took her to cafes near the promenade, boutiques tucked behind glassy streets, art galleries where sunlight fell through stained windows like liquid gold. I spoke of things she had never known but always dreamed of. Limited edition watches, designer perfumes that cost more than a month's rent, dinners served under chandeliers where the wine alone had a name older than both of us. She listened, wide-eyed, her fingers tracing the pearls on my wrist as if they carried a secret spell. It must be wonderful, she said once, to live without worrying about money. I smiled softly. It's not the money that frees you, Lydia. It's knowing you earned the right to spend it. That sentence lingered with her. I saw it in the way she began to look at her clothes, her shoes, her small gold ring. The quiet envy that took root in her eyes was the first sprout of what I had planted. A week later, she texted me a photo, a handbag. "Do you think it suits me?" she asked. The price tag was obscene. "It's beautiful," I replied. "But beautiful things demand courage. You must know you deserve them," she replied with a heart emoji. I didn't need to see her face to know she'd already sent the photo to Jonathan. From that moment, her appetite grew. Like a child who's tasted honey, she couldn't stop. Every week it was something new: a necklace, a weekend trip, a car. She bragged to me, not knowing she was handing me evidence. "Jonathan says the company is struggling," she told me one afternoon, pouting as she stirred her drink. "But how can that be? He still drives a Jaguar." I tilted my head thoughtfully. "Perhaps he's saving for something bigger? A house, maybe?" Her eyes gleamed. "He did mention one with a pool." I smiled. "Then he must truly adore you." Halsoneven. That night, I opened an encrypted message from Thomas, the senior accountant who had worked with my father for years. "As you suspected," it read. "Large withdrawals over the past 2 months. Company accounts. Personal authorization, Jonathan Hale." Attached were scanned copies of invoices, handbags, jewelry, a down payment to a real estate agency in Windermere, all neatly traced back to him. Each transaction another thread in the net I was weaving. Meanwhile, I began to appear more frequently at the Ward Foundation. The staff, surprised at first, welcomed me with polite smiles that soon turned into genuine respect. I sat through board meetings Jonathan once dominated, speaking little but observing everything. In those rooms filled with men who once saw me as decoration, I spoke when it mattered, and when I did, they listened. My father had taught me negotiation not as battle, but as music: timing, tone, silence. I reminded them who truly owned this legacy. Jonathan hated it. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened when I entered his office, the way he masked irritation with charm. "You've been coming by a lot lately," he said one morning, pretending to sound amused. "I'm simply learning," I replied, smiling. "After all, the company bears my family's name." He laughed, but his eyes stayed cold. I could almost hear his thoughts. "She knows." But he didn't know how much I knew or how far ahead I was. Within a month, the partners began calling me directly. "Mrs. Ward, we value your insight. Your proposal for the Windermere expansion brilliant." Their trust came easily once they saw my precision, my calm authority. Jonathan, who once sat at the center of every conversation, now found himself orbiting around me. At home, our dinners grew keyer. He still smiled, still asked about my day, but his voice carried tension, like a string pulled too tight. I played my part flawlessly soft, affectionate, unthreatening. The perfect wife who asked nothing, noticed nothing. But each night, when he went to bed, I opened my notebook and recorded every number Thomas sent me. I filed the receipts, the transfers, the timelines. My plan no longer needed imagination. It was building itself through their greed. And Lydia, my lovely Lydia, was the unwitting architect of it all. One afternoon, she showed up at our usual cafe in a bright red dress, her perfume so strong it clung to the air. "Guess what?" she whispered, sliding into the booth. "Jonathan's buying us a house. He said it's almost done." I looked at her with practiced delight. "That's wonderful, Lydia. You're living a dream." She giggled, sipping her wine. "Sometimes I think I was born for this life." I didn't disagree. Some dreams, after all, are meant to lead you straight to ruin. Outside, the rain had started again, soft and steady. I watched it trace thin lines down the window. Each drop fell exactly where gravity decided inevitable, unstoppable. So it would be with them. In the weeks that followed, Jonathan's tension grew. His temper at the office flared more often. He stayed later, spoke less. The numbers in our accounts shrank while Lydia's jewelry collection bloomed online. Every move they made, every dollar they spent, fed into the storm quietly gathering behind me. One night, as I stood by my office window watching the city lights shimmer on the glass, I whispered to my reflection, "Greed is a flame, Lydia, and I am only giving it air." The reflection smiled back calm, knowing, and utterly unafraid. Jonathan's world was beginning to burn, and he didn't even smell the smoke yet. It began with tenderness, the kind that feels almost foreign when it returns after a long absence. Jonathan started coming home early. He brought flowers again, filled the kitchen with laughter, and insisted on cooking for me. His sudden warmth might have melted another woman's heart, but mine had already frozen into quiet suspicion. One night, he placed a porcelain bowl in front of me, steam curling into the air like pale fingers. "Your favorite," he said softly. "You've been losing weight, love. You need strength." "Ah." He smiled as he sat across from me, watching me lift the spoon to my lips. The food was perfect, balanced, fragrant, beautiful, but there was something off. The faint metallic trace that had haunted me that night of the promotion dinner was there again, subtle yet undeniable. I smiled anyway. It's delicious. And in that moment I decided I would not die easily. The next day I bought a small white hamster. The shopgirl laughed when I asked for the liveliest one. "This little one never stops running," she said. "I named him Cloud because he was soft, quiet, and harmless, just like I pretended to be." Every evening after dinner, I saved a small portion of Jonathan's food and placed it in a small ceramic dish near Cloud's cage. "For you," I whispered, watching his tiny paws clutch the grains. He ate eagerly, unaware that he had become the guardian of my life. Days passed. Jonathan's attentions grew sweeter, heavier. He began to bring me gifts again, perfume from Paris, silk scarves, a bottle of imported vitamins. "They're good for you," he said, placing them gently in my palm. A friend recommended them, very exclusive. He watched closely as I opened the cap. I smiled, took one pill, and swallowed. Or at least, he thought I did. Later, in my private office, I crushed the capsule and mixed it with Cloud's food. At first, nothing changed. He ran on his wheel every night, bright-eyed and restless. I almost hoped I was wrong, that maybe Jonathan's guilt had softened into genuine care, that maybe redemption existed, even for him. But truth doesn't forgive the way love does. On the 13th day, Cloud stopped running. He sat still, trembling slightly. By morning, he was gone, his tiny body curled under the wheel, stiff and silent. For a long time, I couldn't move. The room felt heavy, the air thick. I stared at the motionless creature who had eaten what was meant for me, and the truth solidified like ice in my chest. The man who once kissed my forehead now seasons my meals with death. I buried Cloud in the garden behind the house, under the pale winter flowers that Jonathan had planted years ago. I knelt in the dirt, hands trembling, heart strangely calm. I whispered, "You saved me, little one." Inside, Jonathan was humming, preparing breakfast. The sound made my stomach turn. That evening, I didn't refuse his meal. I smiled as usual, asked him about work, even laughed at his jokes. My mask had never fit better. But beneath the table, I turned on the small voice recorder hidden in my bracelet, a habit I had learned since meeting Lydia. Jonathan spoke casually about the company, about upcoming meetings, but every word sounded rehearsed. His eyes never truly met mine. When I coughed lightly after a bite, he leaned forward too quickly. "Careful, love," he said, his hand brushing mine. "You always eat too fast." The performance was flawless, so was mine. After dinner, I excused myself, claiming fatigue. In my private room, I photographed everything: the half-empty vitamin bottle, the plates, the remains of the meal. I sealed them in small plastic bags, labeling each one with the date. Then, with steady hands, I took a final picture of Cloud's tiny body before wrapping him gently in cloth. Evidence. Quiet, irrefutable evidence. I stared at the photographs glowing on my phone screen, each image colder than the last. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped feeling fear. Only purpose remained. When I walked past Jonathan that night, he looked up from his book and smiled. "Feeling better?" "Yes," I said softly. "Much better." He didn't notice the distance in my voice, the way my hand brushed the doorknob a little too firmly. He was sure of his charm, his control, his disguise of domestic warmth. But he didn't realize he was feeding me more than poisoned meals. He was feeding me certainty. Later, lying in bed beside him, I listened to his breathing. Slow, calm, a murderer's rhythm pretending to be human. I wondered how many nights he had watched me sleep, calculating doses, waiting for weakness to show. I turned my head toward the ceiling. The shadows moved gently across it, like smoke. Somewhere beyond the walls, the sea whispered against the rocks. I thought of Cloud, of the small grave behind the house, of innocence dying in silence. And I thought of what must come next. Jonathan believed he was playing a game of life and death. He didn't know that I had already learned the rules and rewritten them. I closed my eyes, my mind cold and precise. Tomorrow, I would act as if nothing had changed. I would let him believe he was winning. But I had already begun to gather the light around me again, the kind that doesn't blind but burns quietly, until it consumes everything that walks too close to it. That morning, the air inside Ward Foundation felt heavy-charged, expectant. Every employee had been summoned to the main hall for an urgent announcement. No one knew why, no one except me. The stage lights were pale against the dark velvet curtains. I stood at the podium, dressed in black, my hair pulled into a clean knot. Beside me, the projector waited quiet, obedient. When Jonathan arrived, confusion flickered across his face. "What is this, Seraphine?" he whispered, forcing a smile. "You'll see," I said calmly. "Please, sit in the front." The room filled, murmurs rising like distant waves. When the clock struck 9, I pressed the remote. The first image lit the screen. Jonathan in Windermere, carrying roses and shopping bags. "This," I began, my voice steady, "was our CEO during his business trip. I signed in it." A ripple moved through the audience, surprise, disbelief. Jonathan's jaw tightened. The next slide appeared, a video. Lydia's voice filled the hall, soft, proud, damning. "Of course Leo is Jonathan's son." Gasps echoed. Someone whispered his name. He stood abruptly. "This is slander." I raised a hand. "Sit down, Mr. Hale. You'll want to see the rest." Invoices followed, company funds diverted to jewelry, cars, a seaside home. Numbers didn't lie, and neither did signatures. The crowd's shock deepened into disgust. Finally, I pressed the last button. The screen went dark, then lit again. A screenshot of messages. Jonathan's words to Lydia glowed like fire across the wall. "The poison is working. She's weaker now. Soon, all of it will be ours." Silence. Not even breath. Jonathan took one step forward, pale as stone. "You don't understand." But I cut him off, my voice low and clear. "You tried to erase me, but I learned to write my name in fire." The guards moved, then swift, firm. He struggled for a moment, shouting my name, but his voice was already lost in the roar of whispers, in the 1,000 eyes that no longer saw a leader, only a liar. I didn't look away as they dragged him from the room. The hall fell quiet again, heavy with the ashes of everything that had burned. When it was over, I turned off the projector. The screen went blank, pure white, like a page waiting for something new to be written. I stood there, alone under the fading lights, unmoving, cold and still, as a statue carved from justice itself. The trial came swiftly, like the closing of a long, bitter season. Every piece of evidence, every photo, recording, and receipt stood as silent witnesses. The jury didn't need persuasion, they only needed to see. Jonathan was sentenced to prison for embezzlement and attempted murder. The verdict was brief, almost merciful. He looked at me once before they took him away, eyes hollow, searching for the woman he had destroyed. But she was no longer there. Lydia's end came sooner. Obsessed and desperate, she tried to follow me one evening outside the courthouse, screaming that everything had been mine, that Jonathan loved her first. Her car skidded, hit a barrier, and the police found traces of the same poison in her purse. She was taken away alive but broken, lost in her own madness. And I did not celebrate. Victory has no taste when it grows from betrayal. I felt only a stillness, like the calm after a fire when the ground still smokes but the danger has passed. Months passed. The company recovered, steadied under my hand. People called me strong, brilliant, unshakable, but inside I was simply quiet. I had learned too much about what strength costs. A year later, I returned to the house by the sea. The air was cool, the sky pale with fog. Waves rolled against the shore in slow, steady rhythms, as if the ocean itself was breathing beside me. I unlocked the door. The rooms were empty now. No laughter, no lullabies, only echoes. On the windowsill, Dust glittered in the soft morning light. I stood there for a long while, listening to the sea, to my own heartbeat, to the peace that had finally returned. I realized forgiveness isn't a gift for the guilty. It's the final act of freedom for the one who survived. I whispered into the wind, "Forgiveness is not for them, it's for me. I have burned, and I have risen." Outside, the fog lifted slowly. The first light of dawn spilled through the window, gentle and golden. And in that light, Seraphine Ward was reborn.